Yes, the word no-till is on my slide in this one. Charged to talk about no-till equipment, I think it says on the program. I focus mostly on planters, drills, air seeders. This is Corn University, but you know what? We use a corn bean rotation, so I'm going to show some things with regards to the bean side as well, primarily because, for instance, harvesting soybeans, you're setting yourself up for planting corn. And again, I should have turned off the word planting equipment, just no-till equipment, because, again, with the systems approach, we've got to think about what we're doing when we're harvesting. How does it affect the next step out there in the field? And so again, when we start thinking the systems approach, start thinking about equipment. Again, I showed you in the keynote my different tillage plots. Been working no-till since 1978, worked with those farmers. I said from 83 to 89, I worked with that grant, working with producers like yourselves. That was between 30 and 50 farmers a year I worked with. So I learned a lot on a lot of different soils around Nebraska. And with that is why I talk at meetings like this, because the things I make you think about. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your equipment. I'm going to tell you what they're doing and why, or what they're not doing and why, and let you decide for yourselves what you need for your operation. But again, I like the no-till system. And I said earlier, I want uniformity every day of the year when I look at a field. You know, this is one of my fields already planted. When you look at that, some people say, well, why don't you run a residue mover? I go, why? Every seed's in the same soil moisture, same soil temperature, and the same residue. It's going to give you your most uniform growth and emergence. Don't make it cooler or wetter. Don't make it warmer and drier at planting time. Make it cooler and wetter the rest of the season. But again, when it comes to uniformity, where did the combine run last year harvesting those beans? If you can see that in your field, you're going to have some problems. You know, a lot of people don't think too much of that little pile of bean residue there hanging on the axle. I don't think too much of it either when it falls off and plugs up the drill, the fertilizer rig, the planter. Majority of the residue handling problems people have at planting time is they didn't handle the residue properly at harvest time. Spread the residue out. Make it work for you, not against you. Platform heads, when you're harvesting those beans, get ready to plant corn next year, chaff distribution is a must. You know, there's a chopper in this combine. Chopper spreads the stems pretty good, but the pods are dropping in a windrow. I got a windrow pods, a little less residue, windrow pods. Next spring is 2 different soil temperatures, 2 different soil moistures. Now, to be truthful, our soil biology is so high, we got rid of the choppers years ago. Because the chopper cuts that residue open, exposes the microbes, breaks down faster. We quit running the choppers because we want the residue to hang around longer. So we don't run a chopper, we just run a spinner spreader, get it spread out. Chaff distribution is a must. And again, industry's been a little slower to respond. This is during wheat harvest many years ago. This is an aftermarket company out of Canada called Chaff Storm and Straw Storm. Really spread that residue out. Equipment companies are now starting to give us that. But when I look at my fields, I want to see uniform height of residue. I want to see uniform spread of the residue. I don't want to see windrows of chaff, windrows of straw, whatever out there. It makes it a lot easier to no-till into. And in wheat country, you see a lot more stripper headers coming in. The stripper header basically combs the grain out of the heads, the kernels of wheat, leaves the stem standing there. If you had a uniform stand, your residue is going to be uniform. It's going to be anchored and attached. The combine needs the chaff spreader because you are spreading the tailings, the chaff, everything else. Get that spread out full width. And again, we're getting new improvements. John Deere's new power board, I'm impressed how wide it can spread it when you learn how to set it up right. Get that residue spread out working for you. Now, there's not much wheat straw there, but here's an irrigated producer in western Nebraska. A lot of wheat straw. Just plant right down through it. You're amazed what your planter can go through. He needs that residue there to keep the sun and wind off the soil surface. And that stripper header, if you're looking at one, considering it, a lot of people like it because it leaves that residue upright. But you know what? If your first snowstorm that comes is a real wet snow with a lot of wind, that stuff will go flat. And when it goes flat, I love that. When it comes to absorbing raindrop impact. I love that when it comes to reducing evaporation. I hate that after a quick rainstorm, underneath the mat of residue, it's going to be wet for a couple of days. That's why I like residue staying upright, anchored, and attached. This is a producer in western South Dakota. The day I was there visiting with him, he was planting sunflowers in that wheat straw. No residue movers on the planter, because that stripper header left some of that straw, 3 feet long. When I start getting long residue or long cover crops out there, residue movers turning up front, start wrapping. Just slice, put the seed in the ground. The same slice you put through the residue to get seed in the ground is a slice the seedling will come up through. So again, we don't run the residue movers. Now our research farm, we run the silver cedar. Again, I told you we have 15-foot terraces, 15-foot equipment, no chopper on there, tallest residue we can. We like the residue tall just so it hangs around. Now, if you're in your first or second or third year no-till, you don't have soil biology, maybe I want it shorter, maybe I want to cycle the residue. But the longer you're in it, the taller you're going to leave it cut. And if it's standing upright, anchored, attached, you seed right through it. The soil's holding it, you don't have to cut it, there's no mat there. We don't run the residue movers, we just go, run through it. Corn harvest, again for Corn University. Your corn head, if it processes residue properly, you'll be amazed how little residue there is to spread. The corn head, the snapping rolls, as the name implies, it snaps the ear off the stalk, runs it through the machine. The corn head, the processing rolls, process the residue downward. Now, as you look at this picture, it's a little bit of a sloping soil. This is a guy in northeast Nebraska. The year I visited with him, he has irrigated corn. Snapped this picture of the year. He had 7 center pivots, full quarters, averaged 265 bushels per acre. Those are 18 20-inch rows going through that big combine, and look how little residue is going out the back. Just the cobs and husks, because the corn head is processing the residue. And again, for an easy no-till, I love these processing corn heads out there. I hate some of them. They're too aggressive. They chew up the residue too much. Notice he's leaving the residue a little bit taller, not chewing up the residue a lot. Because again, the wind blows in Nebraska. It slopes like this, the residue can float and move on you. The longer it is, the more anchored and attached it is, the less problems you'll have. Now, imagine this field. This is taken the day after harvest. This is 90 bushel dryland corn. The previous guy had 265. He loves no-till because of the slopes. This one, you know, all the corn residue is still there. 90 bushel corn is all it is. And you look at that and say, well, I got lazy cows that don't like to bend over when they graze. I like the tall stalks. They catch more snow. The thing is, when you look at these corn stalks, they've never been between the snapping rolls of the combine. This is a combine that has intermeshing snapping rolls. And intermeshing snapping rolls, one flute hits the stalk, it leans this way. The next flute hits the stalk, it leans this way. And if you got a variety with weak ear shank, you get lateral whipping, you get ear toss out the side of the head. Well, if you're only thinking about harvest, you raise the head up, reduce the lateral whipping, basically comb that ear off the stalk. The intermeshing snapping rolls doesn't even let the stalk between them, and that's why the stalks are leaning. That's why those stalks are not crushed and not opened back up. Now, a long-term no-tiller would like that because the residue will hang around a long time. First-year no-tiller will say, too much residue. The problem here, though, is back to the systems approach. This is a 6-row combine. Notice 6 rows are leaning away from me. Next 6 are leaning toward me, away, toward. Go out there with a 12-row planter and start planting. These first 6 rows are working fine. The next 6 rows, the stalks are leaning into you, and every loose hose, wire, cable, chain on that planter just got snagged and you cuss no-till planting. That's a no-till harvest problem. If your combine is half as wide as your planter, you combine 2 passes the same direction, 2 passes back, plant in the same direction they're leaning, and that problem goes away. Little things start to add up when you start thinking of the systems approach. How is this step going to affect the next? So again, 90 bushel. Process that residue. Maybe let it hang around. Or a producer I met in Kansas, he says, put a lean bar out front. The lean bar leans the stalks the same direction you're going, such I don't have to worry about those hoses, wires, and cables and chains. He's got a complete fertilizer system there. He's got starter. He's got weights. We're going to talk more about the weights and planter attachments later. But again, the lean bar. This producer on an air seeder, the lean bar, and he filled his full of concrete, make sure it's heavy enough to lean the stalks over. This producer, again, a big lean bar in front of his 750. When he's out there drilling into his corn stalks, he can knock those residue the same direction he's traveling. It doesn't cut it loose. And if it's the same direction you're traveling, you just sort of slide between them with your openers. You're not cutting the residue. Now, back many years ago, we used to run a combine that had knife-to-knife snapping rolls. This is on our bottom of our research farm. This is the day after harvest of about 200 bushel corn. The knife-to-knife snapping rolls is what's showing up on all these corn heads from Europe, the Fantini, the Capellas, the Geringhoffs, all these, trying to process the residue. Now, be truthful, it's over-processed. These grinding snapping rolls, these shredders that are on corn heads, my opinion, are way over-processing the residue. It takes horsepower, it takes dollars, it takes weight. I want to leave the residue taller, longer, anchored and attached, and I don't want it cut up loose to blow away. When it's this short, That's the day after harvest. By next spring, we had a lot of residue decomposition. We had a lot of residue moving in the wind. And in fact, like I say, that's 200 bushel corn. This is a different field. There's 200 bushel corn with our soil biology when you cut it short and chew up those stalks so much. We quit running aggressive snapping rolls. We went to old tapered snapping rolls to leave the stalks longer, taller, attached, because we need the residue to hang around. This is a field over 20 years of no-till, corn bean rotation. That's how much soil biology we have. The 200 bushel corn disappears. And again, when a farmer calls me and says he's having residue handling problems, it tells me he's not a continuous no-tiller. He doesn't have that healthy soil biology working for him. We went to tapered snapping rolls. We leave the residue a lot taller. In fact, we've taken the bottom step off our ladder there because it's banging against the residue. That taller residue then is what we used, so it hangs around. Again, over 200 bushel corn residue, look how little residue is coming out of the back of the combine. I get a lot of farmers say, well, I got a corn reel on my combine. I go, why? Well, I get those stalks to go through the combine. I go, why? You only need the cob to go through the combine. Well, the corn doesn't stand well. I already showed you our no-till corn stands because we've got a good soil structure. So again, think about systems approach. Again, think about catching that snowfall. Because again, too often I see, no-till on the right, tilt on the left. That knob there, yes, the snow blows away, but it freezes hard. When it comes to spring thaw time, that's actually a colder soil where the snow is insulating the soil. Like I say, our snow melts from below because heat's rising from below. The other thing is where the deep drifts are, that spot's going to stay wet for a long time. So again, uniformity every day of the year when you start thinking about even snow cover, residue spread, everything else goes with it. Now let's get to the planters. This is an older planter, but think about any planter, drill, air seeder out there. First thing is going to be meter the seed. I don't even talk about that. You should be taking care of your seed meters, whatever. I've been doing that for years. I don't care what tillage system you're in. When I start thinking about no-till, I start thinking of the next 4 steps. Those 4 steps are critical. The first is going to be cut or handle the residue, because without the tillage, the residue is still there. Second, penetrate soil, desired seeding depth. Again, a tilled soil might be firmer. Cutting through residue might be firmer. Make sure you penetrate desired seeding depth. Third, establish seed-to-soil contact. You get the moisture in the seed, get the roots out in the soil. Fourth, close the seed V. Protect that seed. Now, some planters, some drills, some air seeders do steps 3 and 4 as one. When you're evaluating your equipment, think of them as separate steps because they're going to make a difference on buying attachments or making adjustments. Okay, the old 1260 runner planter. Back in the 70s when no-till was first starting to show its head, 60s, that runner planter couldn't cut the first stick of residue. They said, no problem, you put a coulter out front to cut the residue. And this is actually a new one. The original ones were about 4 inches wide, a wavy coulter. That was too much soil disturbance, too much weight required for penetration. The newer ones were 2 inches wide. Newer ones yet, 1 inch, 5/8, ripples, smooth, going down narrower to minimize the amount of soil disturbance that the coulter does. Cut the residue. Second step, penetrate soil desired seeding depth. That lightweight runner planter couldn't penetrate it untilled soil. Again, when I put the coulter out front, that wavy coulter did some tillage, loosened the soil, and I could penetrate. With that loosened soil, it was easy to get seed-to-soil contact. It was easy to close the seed V, and we call that coulter no-till attachment. No, it was tillage back in the system. It was just not full width tillage, it was narrow tillage. This is actually the first strip till systems out there, doing the strip till with the planter, with the coulter up front. And we saw changes with that when people went to a triple coulter system, doing that tillage up front. Well, again, for no-till, rather than spending the money up front, companies have beefed up in back. On corn planters, it's hard, you'd be hard-pressed to find a runner planter anymore. You'd be hard-pressed to find one that light anymore. That industry's given us no-till without the tillage by beefing up the components in back. Well, when I first started with extension in '81, everyone says, well, you're going to make me buy that Buffalo planter. At that time, they're the only ones claiming they had a no-till planter. Even to this day, John Deere has the trouble saying the word no-till because they're still selling big four-wheel drive tractors and tillage equipment. When they first came out with the 750 drill, it was called the all-till drill. It was not called a no-till drill. Excellent no-till drill, so is their planter. But again, we got to be careful. Buffalo's made their money on planters and cultivators. Kinsey makes their money on planters. I trust companies like that because they understand the planters. Buffalo at the time, I'm convinced, John Deere, you don't need to buy a Buffalo. But again, think of the 4 steps. Cut or handle residue. They got a shank opener there in the middle of the picture. Doesn't cut residue, just acts like a rake to pick it up. So they put a smooth, straight residue cutting coulter in front, not a wavy tillage coulter. Penetrate the soil. That shank opener pulls itself down and in. Seed to soil contact, they got a little press wheel right on top of the seed, then behind it another set of wheels to close the seed V, or a set of discs to close the seed V, and a harrow that's not on the picture to cover it all up. You can see the 4 steps right there. Now, a lot of guys bought the Buffalo planter, a lot of guys cussed the Buffalo planter, primarily that 1x10 wheel running right on top of the seed. And what happened was, if you didn't have a crisp seed V and you had a wet, sticky soil, that wheel would pick up the seeds and pick it out of the seed V. It was a misadjustment problem if the planter wasn't running tail down to firm the seed V. And I say that it's a misadjustment problem because what's the most popular press wheel on these air seeders nowadays? A 1x10 type wheel right on top of the seed, good seed to soil contact. So again, think of the steps and you can evaluate any planter, drill, air seeder out there. Again, the runner planter is gone. Everybody's got the disc openers now. This is a front view of the John Deere, they call them the True V disc opener. A highlighted area there of about 2 inches of blade contact. When you actually look close, the blades are only touching about 1 inch in the middle there. That 1 inch is not at the bottom of the seed V, it is right up at ground level where you're encountering your residue. Those are 2 edges sharp working together, cutting the residue and parting the residue. And I say they're sharp. They're sharper than any coulter I've found on the market once you start running the coulter. Now, a brand new coulter might be sharp, but it doesn't take too long to get dull. Those are self-sharpening and working together. Now, as they wear, they get to be a smaller diameter. 1 inch of blade contact there. If they wear to the point that they aren't touching, you've got 2 cutting edges now rather than 1. You've got half the weight per blade. Adjust the disc, make sure they're sharp, working together. You can cut a lot of residue with those. Some brands go staggered, one in front of the other. Case IH is known for that. This is the Deutz Alice planter, which is now sold by Landau. A lot of the no-till drills had the staggered discs, one in front of the other. Again, working together. There, they're just contacting, not forcing blade contact. But again, cut the residue and open up the seed V. Now, there's a direct relationship on these disc openers and operating depth. Corn planters were designed when corn planting depths were 2 to 3 inches. Corn planters have 15-inch disc openers on them. At a 15-inch diameter, if we imagine planting 2 to 3 inches, just sort of draw a line there, 2 or 3 inches up. Notice the front edge of that opener is coming down at a residue cutting angle. That is important because I get a lot of farmers tell me they're hairpinning residue. Hairpinning means you're pushing down, bending it like a hairpin into the seed V. If you're hairpinning residue, you're simply planting too shallow for this diameter disc you have on your planter. If you look at drills, the early drills that came out for planting soybeans an inch, inch and a half, they were 12 or 14-inch discs. That smaller diameter still had a residue cutting angle. If you use an opener like that and try to run an inch deep, I can guarantee you're going to hairpin residue. What's interesting is AGCO, with the new 9000 series of white, went to a 16-inch disc rather than 15. And they proudly advertise they can plant up to 4 inches deep now. Operating diameter is your residue cutting angle. Keep that in mind. If you're hairpinning residue, plant deeper. I like planting deeper. So cutter handle residue, I prefer to cut it. I prefer to cut down through it. And here's a producer I worked with. He lives planting down the old row. He says, this year's crop follows last year's roots. They don't have to grow through compacted soil. This year's crop picks up the nutrients that last year's roots are releasing. That residue there is never going to crust, never going to wash out if it breaks over a hill. I can't drive that straight. I can't do that. But if you had a residue mover in front of that planter or a coulter in front of that planter, you couldn't do it. Because residue mover would kick that root ball. Coulter would disturb that soil. He planted straight up through there after rain started racing the mark. You'd be amazed. When you cut the slice, put the seed in the ground, it's the same slice the seedling can come out of. I don't need to move the residue off the row. So when it comes to that first step, cutter handle residue, industry's given us that with disc openers. Second step then becomes important. Penetrate the soil to desired seeding depth. Back in the 80s, basically planters all changed then. The runners disappeared, double disc openers showed up, parallel links showed up. Parallel links, they put down pressure springs on like I have pictured here. Back in the 70s, there was a researcher at Iowa State did a lot of work on, put a coulter in the ground down at operating depth, pull it along at operating speed. It took about 500 to 600 pounds to get that coulter to work per opener. Well, then he started looking at a double disc opener, disturbed about the same width of the soil. It was about the same diameter as a coulter. It took 500 to 600 pounds on that opener to get it to work. We look at the planters nowadays. Well, 20 years ago, before the latest changes, the row units weighed 300 pounds. You might have put another 50 pounds of seed on there. You might have put on down pressure springs there. One spring package would be 100, or 90 pounds per row. Two springs is 180 pounds per row. Is that enough down pressure? 180 plus 300 when the planter's empty? May or may not be enough. Deere has heavy-duty spring option at that time at 300 pounds per row. They got an airbag system now at 400 pounds per row. Industry's starting to build that in for us to penetrate the soil at desired seeding depth, to cut down through untilled soil and cut down through the residue. Again, varied by design. White on their 5000 series of planter, they were selling a Colder. The Colder loosened the soil. The light-duty springs there, they only did about 50 pounds per row. But the soil was already loose. They didn't need bigger springs. White's selling that planter now without the Colders. They had a 4-spring package of 400 pounds per row available down pressure. Again, industry's giving us that we don't have to put on as many attachments. So again, we think about the down pressure. But now you got to do a math problem. This happens to be a ridge planter. He's got Sukup ridge cleaners underneath there. Sukup ridge cleaners, down pressure springs, we're looking for 200 pounds per row. The John Deere heavy-duty down pressure springs, we're looking for 300 pounds per row. 2 plus 3 is 500. 500 pounds per row down pressure times a 6-row planter. And you'll notice that that toolbar did not weigh 3,000 pounds. It's being lifted off the rock shaft there. The more springs you got pushing things in the soil, they're pushing against the weight. You need weight for those springs to work, so we got to add that weight. And again, with Colders in the ground, that needs more weight. White on the 5000 series, put the weights right on the toolbar to get the Colder in the ground, to loosen the soil, the springs to transfer what it needed to the row unit. With the new heavy spring package and no Colders, it still transfers the weight to the row unit. Make sure the weight is there. You need enough weight to make sure you penetrate. You need enough weight on a lot of planters, drills to keep the seed metering drive still turning. So make sure that's there. Now, when I first started working at no-till back in '78, working with these farmers through the '80s, I had a new problem. RTK, auto steer, central seed hoppers. There's plenty of weight on the middle 6 or 8 rows there. Come out here on the wing. We're no longer carrying seed out there. I can like that because the row unit is going to be more consistent weight. I can hate the old John Deere 3-bushel seed hoppers they had for planting soybeans. Think about it. When the planter's empty and you fill it up, there's 180 pounds. How do you vary the down pressure 180 pounds going across the field? You couldn't manually. Today you've got automatic adjustment on these air shocks. You can adjust that. But you know what? There's plenty of weight in the middle. On the end, especially with RTK, you're buying these planters without markers. Put some weight out there on the end. We had some major problems in Nebraska a year ago with some dry planting conditions. People were out there with the central seed hoppers, got the planter set, and they dug right behind the tractor, and they thought everything was set the same, and they took off planting. The middle rows came up, were growing nice. The outside rows where there's less weight, the airbags were actually forcing the planter toolbar to ride higher. And the depth control wheels are no longer engaging depth. They were planting about 2 inches in the middle and about 3/4 inch out on the outside ends. Put the weight out there in the end. Make sure that planter stays down in the ground. Again, we've got fertilizer tanks on our little 6-row planter. Those tanks are full of water. Here's again, back in the early '80s, I'm planting no-till into grain sorghum residue, planting my soybeans. Still some till in the background before we converted the entire farm. But we added that weight. When we bought that planter, it came with these Colders, it came with heavy-duty down pressure springs. I'm convinced the no-till attachment was the heavy-duty down pressure springs. In fact, if you look closer, you can see the Colder on row 1, rows 2 through 6 don't have Colders on it. We got rid of the Colders in the '80s because we found out in our clay soil where it's wet and sticky, that Colder, even running that shallow, would pull up mud and start balling up my depth gauge wheel, start balling up my press wheel. We got rid of the Colders, we run a lot cleaner and do a lot better job. Now, a lot of farmers ask me how much weight, how much down pressure I need, and I can look at you all and say, I don't know. Check it in your planting conditions. And what you do is when it's fit to go to the field, a couple weeks ahead of planting time, go out and check it. Your planter will be empty. That's the lightest it's going to be at that time. A couple weeks ahead of time, if you're having problems, you got time to go to the dealer to buy heavy-duty springs. You got time to go get some weights to put on the row unit or something to make sure you penetrate. If you do it a couple weeks early, it shakes up your neighbors. They don't know the planter's empty. They think they're behind. Love doing that. Get the planter in the field, get the toolbar the right height, properly leveled front to back. And if you're going to cheat a little, cheat tail down and back for seed to soil contact. As I'm pulling the planter, I want that row unit tail down. Now, if your parallel links are worn a little bit, it'll look straight when it's parked, but as soon as you start driving, the top links compress, the bottom links stretch, your planter will be running nose down. When you're checking your planter level, have someone else watch as you drive by. Make sure it's properly leveled, toolbar right height, parallel lengths running level. Stop with the planter in the ground. If those depth gauge wheels are truly gauging planting depth, they'll be in firm contact with the ground. Take a hold of them and try rotating them. If I can spin them freely, you need to tighten your springs. You need to buy extra springs. You need to put some weight on the back. You need to crank your air pressure, whatever. If you take a hold of them and you can't budge them, I can guarantee you're holding the soil down so tight that when you're forcing the soil out, you create sidewall compaction. So even though you check it 2 weeks ahead of planting, check it in fields as conditions change. More down pressure, less down pressure, depending. Can you slide those depth gauge wheels? Now, on the older planters that drove by the drive wheel, go over and try the drive wheel. Can you slip it? Because as the springs are pulling down on their planter unit, they're picking up in the toolbar, the drive wheel gets light. If the drive wheel gets light, you need weight in the toolbar, and that's why we fill our fertilizer tanks full of water, to make sure our drive wheels keep turning. So do that. Check it as your conditions change. I say we took the coulters off. If you're familiar with the John Deere bubble coulter, there's about ½ inch of steel missing on that coulter. If you got an abrasive soil or rocky soil, I can like that to take the wear, tear, and abuse away from my openers. John Deere says, rather than 2.5 millimeter thick discs, we'll sell you 3 or 3.5 thick millimeter discs. I don't need the coulter to take the wear and tear. So even companies are beefing them up now. We don't need the coulters. Now, like I say, that coulter run only that shallow for us pulls up mud once in a while. This producer ran his coulter a little longer than I did. I looked at that and I said, what happens when that wave of that coulter hits wet, sticky soil? He farms in the sand hills near Ainsworth, Nebraska. Looked down at his dry sand, kicked it, and says, what's a wet, sticky soil? And seriously, you got to think about that again when you're reading a farm magazine. Here's what somebody's doing. Go back to that first paragraph where it said he's from. What are his conditions compared to yours? What's his rainfall? What's his soil type? For him, that wavy coulter was not a problem. For me, sticky clay, it is a problem. I said, how do you like no-till? And he sheepishly looked at me and said, I don't no-till. He says with the abrasive sands, he couldn't keep discs and bearings on that planter until he put a coulter on and take the wear, tear, and abuse. Again, the planter companies are beefing things up back there. We don't need the coulter as much. Some of the drill companies still are running coulters because they haven't beefed up in back. So again, think about these steps. Cutter handle residue. He's not doing it for that. He's doing it for wear, tear, and abuse so he can penetrate soil to desired seeding depth. Marion Kelmer over in Illinois. A few years ago, this was his planter. I had to give him this slide because he didn't even have a copy of it. Notice he's got fertilizer coulters up front. The tillage from the coulters incorporated some residue. I had to put residue movers on to kick some out. A little bit more tillage back there trying to dry out his poorly drained soil. Well, Marion quit running this planter. Well, the thing that's interesting is look up front. There are 12 John Deere rear wheel weights going across an 8-row planter. When you got 3 coulters per row plus the opener going to the ground, that's basically 4. That's how much weight it took to make it work. Our John Deere planters don't have all that stuff in front. They don't have all that weight stacked on top because we're just getting the opener in the ground. So again, pay attention to what do you got going in the ground. We don't even have starter attachments on our planter because that costs extra money, takes extra weight. Our starter fertilizer to pop up in furrow, watch the salt content, put on fertilizer elsewhere. And again, back in the 80s, here's the old 5x7 toolbar, an old John Deere 7000, planting no-till. You'd be amazed what your planter can go through. This farmer says, don't even listen to Jasa, hook onto yours and try it. He didn't go out and buy springs or anything. He had the standard 125-pound springs. And his stands look something like that. Again, herbicide reined in and activated. If you got your herbicide on already, you don't want to put residue movers on and kick the herbicide out. That's when we learned to no-till. Roundup was available in the early 80s. It was only $100 a gallon. I didn't like that. We put on our early pre-plant herbicides 2 weeks to a month before planting, planted into weed-free environments. Now, I like planting down the old rows, so does he. Some people say plant between the rows. The planter doesn't have to handle as much residue. I go, all right, maybe. As you plant between the rows, you notice that far row, the corn stalks will run over. You start chewing up your tires real fast in your tractors. They'll say, no problem, you get a stalk stomper or a stalk roller or something to knock those rows over to preserve your tires. No, I still like planting down the old row. That row won't crust, it won't wash out, it's not going to dry out. Planting between the rows, I got a couple rows going in wheel tracks from last year. I got some other rows going into soft rows because I didn't drive on them last year. Now I got the airbag down pressure system. Where do you set that airbag? For the soft row or for the compact wheel track row? I don't like the airbags from that standpoint. I like hard springs because I can adjust each row separately. I do like controlled wheel traffic. I plant down the old row. I never plant in the wheel track. It's a lot easier to set the planter as well. Now, where's the most biology in the field when you're in continuous row crops? It's in the old row. Here's a producer who was on 36-inch corn. He had furrow irrigation, gated pipe. Gates were 36 inches apart. When he was planting his soybeans, he thought he might be losing yield, so he went to the blacksmith and had a quick-touch hitch built with a 5-inch offset. Sets his planter for half-rate population planting his soybeans, and as he plants down the row, you'll see that next to the row unit, he's 5 inches to the side. Now, people walked around back there up front, you can see him a little better. With his RTK guidance, he turns around, comes back, and plants 5 inches the other side, and he has paired row beans, 5 inches each side of the old row. Now, if you actually look out in front, you can see bright colored residue, and 5 inches to the side, you see some duller colored residue. Year before, he had corn on corn. He planted 5 inches offset with his RTK. When he planted his beans, the paths you're going to see right now are going 5 inches to the old side where there was no row. When he comes back, he's going to be planting on the corn root balls from 2 years ago. Last year's root ball, 2 years ago, no root ball. When his beans were coming up, the entire field was striped. They're planted the same day, planter set the same, just turn around and come back. The row that's not there very well is the row that went into what I call no man's land. The row that looks nice is the one that went into 2-year-old root balls. There was more soil biology, better planting conditions. We find better planting conditions going down the old row because those roots built some soil structure, loosened up the soil for you. I love planting down the old row. He likes planting down the old row. Well, on this he can't. Be truthful though, for our corn on corn, we do some research for corn on corn. We got some producers in Nebraska, corn on corn. We have found right beside the old row, because corn is so critical for uniform depth, for uniform emergence. Anytime you got bounce over corn root ball, you could have a problem. On this planter, we actually put narrow depth gauge wheels on the planter so you get closer to the old row. Depth gauge wheels don't run on the old row. Again, just plant beside the old row. Some people say, what about residue movers? Residue movers were designed in a corn, bean, wheat type rotation. They were never designed to handle corn root balls. They were designed to push away residue from wheat or soybeans that were spread with the combine. When it comes to corn root balls, they're going to engage the root ball and roll it out or cut it off, or who knows what's going to happen. But you know what? People ran them for years in ridgetail. When it comes to uniformity in the field, that's what I think about. Uniformity every day of the year. Here's a producer in his second year no-till, had beans, planted beside it for corn, planted beside it for beans, trying to build up residue, build up root soil across the soil profile. It's still a tilled soil there. He's not still got it built up very well yet. He needs no residue mover. What if for some reason he decided to plant across the screen? I've got bare, warm soil. I've got residue-covered soil. It might be cooler, wetter. Bare, warm, cooler, wetter. You put a residue mover on and kick that out, make it all bare. You get a more uniform stand, you get better yield, and your dealer will show you that data to convince you to buy his residue mover. It was more uniform. You might have better yield. Once you have residue everywhere, corn on corn, residue everywhere, ran the residue mover a little too aggressive, moved some soil, should never move soil. As it planted, it was a nice black strip. In Nebraska, the wind blows. 2 days later, 3 days later, the wind blows some residue back. So that first plant way up front is warm, dry, come up quick. The next one's a little cooler, wetter because some residue blew back. The next one, come up quick. The next one actually leafed out under that pile of residue. Everything I'm describing there decreases uniformity, decreases yield. We got rid of the residue movers and our yields went up again. Got rid of the colders, they went up. Got rid of the residue movers, they went up because of more uniform stands. And our agronomy department, we got Roger Elmore here representing our agronomy department. He's going to be talking later. Before he got there, we had a special project where our agronomy department head said in 5 years, we're going to raise corn on corn and raise 300 bushel corn. They never made it. They made 284 irrigated conditions, I think is the best they did. But this is what they evolved to. Plant beside the old row, process the residue at harvest time with a combine knife-to-knife snap and rolls, no residue mover on the planter. And this is actually in a part of the field where it's a 44,000 on a 44,000. That's why it looks like a lot of plants, a lot of residue there. 5 years irrigated corn on corn. It works when you pay attention to the principles. Again, beside the row, process the residue. Never drive on the residue. Tires don't get worn. Again, we can like that. On that research farm, we do have floating residue movers with depth bands for the researchers who want to move residue. That floating design so they don't gouge. Depth bands so they don't move a lot of soil. When they're riding on a thick layer of residue, they're just moving the surface residue. You don't have to move 100%. And again, if you need more uniform seeding conditions, you got a combine that didn't spread residue well, you got some wind that drifted some residue well, I can like these. If I got uniform anchored attached residue, I don't need these. Again, uniform anchored attached, planted into wheat stubble. It's all anchored attached, no residue movers. Leave it all in place. Let's get back to the planters. Cutter handle residue, disc openers, penetrate soil, weight and down pressure. Transfer the weight to where you need it with springs or airbags or whatever. Step 3, seed to soil contact. Step 4, close the seed V. This is one of the farmers worked with in the mid-'80s. He had an international 400 cyclo planter. And he was out there planting. He says, I got a good, sharp, accurate plant runner on that. I can put sand in my insecticide hopper and tighten up the down pressure spring. With soybean residue, there's not much residue to cut. With extra weight and the sharp runner, I can penetrate soil desired seeding depth. With a big, wide press wheel in back, nothing for seed to soil contact, nothing to close the seed V. And when I said, let's use your skills, abilities, and equipment to no-till next to your conventional, his conventional was a disc field cultivate next to this. And you can see every seed there. It rained that night. That silted in. And this did 13 bushel per acre better than the disc field cultivate next to it. He got lucky. He bought a new planter that had different closing system on it because he knew where the trouble was. And again, think about the steps and you can evaluate your seeder. Oh, don't bounce on that button. John Deere offered angled closing wheels. And when John Deere first got into no-till, they said everybody needs these cast iron closing wheels. Cast iron closing wheels were designed for the guys further south who are doing double crop, harvest their wheat. They got a dry soil condition. They're planting soybeans or sunflowers or grain sorghum or whatever. And they need extra closing force. And that extra closing force actually has a sharp edge on there to cave off some of that hard soil for seed to soil contact. For spring planting conditions, especially with any kind of clay content, that sharp edge there cuts off soil and it almost leaves a rope of clay there that as it dries, you can almost just lift it out. I don't like the cast iron in wet soil conditions. It's for dry soil conditions. Niall Wallenhop, when he used to be up at University of Wisconsin, he did a study going out talking to producers who had sidewall compaction concerns. 90% of those guys had planters with angled closing wheels on the back. And he said 90% of those had cast iron closing wheels. What was happening is, opening up the seed V. If you take a look at those wheels, they intersect an imaginary point about 2 inches below the soil surface. Remember, this was designed when corn planting depths were 2 to 3 inches deep. Well, let's exaggerate. Here's 1 inch, here's 2 inches. Open it up 2 inches deep, drop the seed in there, squeeze down here at 2 inches deep, and in till soil, there's enough loose soil there that we put enough pressure here that it bubbled up, and from the road you can see the distinctive W. In the late 60s, you knew what neighbor bought a Maximerge, because everybody else had a wide press wheel back then. Now you get a no-till. Open it up, drop the seed in there, squeeze tight down here at 2 inches. There's no loose soil to bubble up, and the seed V may or may not close, and we all panic. Grab the 3/4 socket for that bolt and back on the spring. The new one's got a quick adjust handle. Open it up, drop the seed in there, squeeze tighter yet. That's where you create sidewall compaction. That's what Niall Wallenhop found out. And if you think about it, as you open your seed V up, if you close your seed V, you fracture the sidewall. What he was doing was actually overpacking with cast iron and too much down pressure. Now I said 2 to 3 inch planting depth. Well, there's a lot of guys in no-till said, that soil's wet down there. I'm going to plant inch and a half, whatever. Open it up, inch. Drop the seed in the ground. Press down here at 2. You don't even have a chance. This is designed as a corn planter and corn planting depths for 2 to 3 inches. Those wheels in the bottom are 1 and 5/8 apart. Go to Texas, to cotton country. Go to the Red River Valley for sugar beet country. They sold a different tailstock back there. They were 7/8 of an inch apart for shallow planting. Rather than squeezing down here, they squeezed up here for shallow planting. Now, MaxImerge Plus, MaxImerge 2, they have a bolt you take out. You move a spacer washer. You can move the wheels in for shallow planting. You move them out for deep planting. I know of nobody who adjusts that. It's too much work when you're counting all those little washers. I plant soybeans 2.5 inches deep with a planter that's designed to plant 2 to 3 inches deep. I plant my milo at 2 inches deep because the planter is designed to plant 2 to 3 inches deep. I plant my corn at 3.5. More about that later. Planter works fine there. Pay attention to your planting depth when you're looking at these planters. Again, here's milo planted with those angle closing wheels, planted 1 inch deep, packing below the seed. Again, you don't even have a chance. Now, some guys say, well, you need to fracture that sidewall. Cut, penetrate, seed to soil contact, close the seed V. Fracture the sidewall. They're going to buy some sort of spoked things back here to get rid of sidewall compaction, close the seed V. The cast iron and the rubber wheels gave you seed to soil contact. I just took that out of the equation by putting spokes in. Again, be careful of the steps. Here's a producer who was planting deeper, and he knew the soil was a little wet. He backed off his down pressure because he didn't want to overpack the seed V. As we dug this up and took a look at it, he's got about 3 problems showing there. The first is you can see the bottom of the seed V, and the roots are running along there, and it's because he didn't even fracture the seed V. He backed off down pressure too much. Roots couldn't get out of the seed V. Second thing is, look about a 1/2 inch up, there's the seed, green coated, Roundup Ready seed. He didn't even have the seed to the bottom of the seed V. Mistake number 2. Mistake number 3, he didn't close it to the top. From the top, sunlight's getting down, he's got green further down the stem from light penetration. Didn't close the seed V. Effectively, he only planted about 1 inch deep, even though he thought he had the planter set at 2.5. So again, take a look at what you're doing out there in the field. If you have seed to soil contact at seeding depth, do not increase the down pressure trying to close the top of the seed V, because you'll screw up the seed to soil contact and create sidewall compaction. You need to close the top of the seed V. I look at several things. First is a simple one. If the planter's running nose down, you'll have trouble closing the seed V. The tail and back supporting the closing wheels. Notice way in back that tail is faced sloping downhill. That should be running level when the planter is properly leveled. As you raise the hitch point of the planter, that will level out and do a better job of closing the seed V. If you got a planter with angled closing wheels, walk up behind it. When it's in the raised position, the wheels are hanging down like this. Take a look at the closing wheels. They'll be closer together in front than they are in back. If you ran a planter that severely nose down, you would V-pile the seed V open. As you pick up the wheel, the way they're mounted, they get more pinch. The higher you raise it, the more that tailstock is running level, even a little up in back, so the planter's more tail down. You do a better job of closing the seed V. First thing is level. The second thing is you're planting the right depth. Remember I said 2 to 3 inch planting depth. What if you're planting 1 inch? You essentially raise the pivot point of those wheels up 1 inch. That means the tail goes down 1 inch, and now they don't pinch. Plant deeper, more tail down, you'll close the seed V better. Now, if you're still having trouble, again, it was designed for 2 to 3 inch planting depth. The first 2 rows hardly left a mark. And if you know exactly where to look, you can see the seeds there. I took a 6-row planter, 2 rows at 1 inch deep. Next 2 rows were 3 inches deep, and just barely available in the corner there is the next 2 rows were 2 inches deep. 2 to 3 inches is what those wheels are designed for. 1 inch, didn't even move soil to close the seed V because that tail was tail down. Wheels are running side by side. Level it, plant a little bit deeper. The second problem is in a shrink soil clay. Close the seed V perfect the day you're planting. 3 days of hot, dry wind, the soil dries, and the seed V opens back up. Notice the only place it opened is where there's no residue. Another reason I like leaving residue on top. Or if you're planting on dry soil already, it's already shrunk. Doesn't matter. This case, remember I said in the early days, some loose soil fell in, the closing wheels bubbled up some loose soil. Why not create some loose soil? That's what these spoke closing wheels do, is create some loose soil for you. The Shaft Furrow V closer caves off some loose soil, such that the angle closing wheels have some loose soil to work with. They don't do anything for seed to soil contact. They don't actually close the seed V, just make some loose soil. The spoke closing wheels make some loose soil. Remember I said the standard wheel gave you seed to soil contact and close the seed V. Put the spoke wheels on, lost seed to soil contact. Hard Martin, this is actually a Hard Martin's planter years ago. Spoked wheels, close the seed V. He's a friend of Gene Keaton's, by Keaton seed firmer for seed to soil contact. Think of the steps. Now, I like the Keaton seed firmer to get all the seeds to the bottom seed V for a uniform seeding depth, or Shafford rebounder do the same thing, or a couple new ones showing up on the market. Part of the patent on the new till system and the Martin till system, underline the word till, they're doing tillage yet. The tillage they're doing is to get rid of some excess water at planting time. It's a version of a strip till system. When it's real wet conditions, they say raise up the residue mover because it's tilling the soil too much. And in drier conditions, they say you need a drag chain behind to cover up those pot marks because the seed zone dries out too much. We don't run something as aggressive as the Martins because they till the soil too much and dry it out too much. Drag chain behind makes a nice loose soil there that will crust real nice in the next rain. Another reason I don't like the aggressive closers. If I need some loose soil, again, think about where these attachments are from. Howard Martin's from Kentucky with 40, 50 inches of rain, drying it out at seeding time, no problem. Keith Thompson, eastern Kansas, a lot less rain. He's got the shrink swell clay. The Thompson T-wheel, sold by Exacta, is a lot less aggressive teeth, the little triangles. He's got the loose soil above the seed V. It's not going to open back up. He's closed it, fractured the sidewall. The Keaton seed firmer is white, hiding up the middle, giving the seed to soil contact. My latest count is, looking in the back of Farm Magazine, you see a little 2-inch square ad, or you search online for spoke closers. I believe there's 28 different manufacturers out there right now. Which one do you buy? Which one designs something for your problem? Shrink swell clay, I love this. Dry the soil out, I love the aggressive teeth. And there's all sorts of ranges in between. There's Schlegel, Posiclose, positively close. I know one farmer who ran too much down pressure when he smeared the soil out and packed it down, those wheels could not even close it. To make the wheels work, he had to back off his down pressure. Again, how do the steps interfere with each other? These rebar type rods really crumble the soil. But if you don't run a residue mover, you get a long corn stalk there, and those bars are all hitting the corn stalk, it may or may not close the soil. They always run it in a sandier soil. They're from Torrington, Wyoming. They always run residue movers because they're in irrigation. What's your conditions? The furrow closer from Copperhead Ag. Cheaper because you keep your existing bearing, existing hub, and all you do is put spokes around there. And there are several companies selling metal versions of these. They're excellent to have, to crumble some loose soil in there. They still have some seed to soil contact. They're depth limited. They don't dig too deep as far as drying out the seed zone. Again, where are you at? What are your needs? For this farmer, he was a little cheap. He said, I'm going to buy half as many Martins. I'm going to leave the standard John Deere wheel on there to give me some seed to soil contact. I'm going to give the Martin for some loose soil. When he mounted the Martin, imagine in your mind those teeth are supposed to be 1 inch longer. Draw 1 inch longer on that bottom tooth. That's exactly where the seed is. That Martin was picking every seed out of his seed V. He said it's too aggressive. He took the cutting torch and cut 1 inch off every tooth there. Across a 16-row planter. It took him a little while. It's less aggressive. He loves it now. Because the depth control, loose soil, seed to soil contact with the Keaton in the middle. Now, if you would have read the directions, something simple. That's 1 5/8 inches apart on the bottom. Martin says it right in the directions. You put a spacer in there to move that wheel out so it doesn't dig out the seed. They want them about 2.5 inches apart if you put on 2 Martins. Read the directions, guys. He didn't cut his off. It's away from the seed, no problem. He gets his loose soil, still gets his depth control. Now, when he's planting straight, no problem. When he's got a gentle curve to the right, the wheel shifts over, no problem. When a gentle curve to the left, the spoke shifts over, and if he's planting too shallow, he'll take out the seeds yet. Plant deeper. I like corn planting depths deeper. Dawn curve time on a 20-inch planter. Again, depth control, some soil firming, some loose soil. Doing Beck found this one down in South America. You use your existing wheel, all you do is bolt notches on the side of it. He hasn't found anybody willing to market in the U.S. yet. But again, less aggressive. In the back there, you can see the just standard John Deere wheels. You can see the tail section flat. Majority of our no-tillers in Nebraska just plant deeper and run the standard wheels. They work fine if you're planting 2 to 3 inches deep. This producer has residue movers in the middle there. Every year I talk to him about raising them up. Every year he turns the knob there about 2 turns. He went from moving a lot of residue to just barely touching. Up front, he's got a fertilizer option there. Put down some nitrogen fertilizer for corn on corn or corn into a heavy cover crop. I like the extra fertilizer. For the pop-up, there's actually a little blue tube hiding in there, and he actually puts it in furrow, because then you don't need the extra attachment. So again, where are you at? What are you doing? What do you need? That's part of what the new till or Martin till planter looks like. Fertilizer up front, residue mover, and then back they like the spokes. We don't have the spokes there. They call that their mutter planter. My mutter planter, the old one, was an 800 early riser. It's a foggy day. Some people say you can't handle residue when it's wet. I say, yes, you can if your discs are sharp working together. You can see some long soybean stems out there. Said we don't run the chopper anymore. This is a planting date study. We had dates circled on the calendar. It was the day to plant. Should have waited a day or two. It rained 1.25 inches the day before. Fog in the morning, we're out planting. That's our long-term soil structure. Our controlled wheel traffic allows us to do. Those row units are running on residue. The fun picture. Look at the depth gauge wheels. 1.25 inches the day before on a clay soil. Not picking anything up. I love continuous no-till soil structure, controlled wheel traffic, residue. The back. The press wheels are picking up some, yes, I will admit. But you know what? Depth control is uniform. Seeds already placed. Hiding underneath there's a white Keaton to give me uniform seeding depth. I got crumblers there rather than standard closing discs to give me the loose soil. And as I pat down on loose soil, some of it picks up, but the seed was already placed. Notice weights on top to penetrate. Notice the seed corn bag there to protect the color of the paint. It's up to you if I'm protecting the red or the green paint. We replaced that 800 with a 900. We replaced that 900 now with a 955. This is on our research plots. The insecticide hopper and back. It's got a 70-pound bag, sandbag from Menards, traction bag, just to make sure we cut. See some posts in the background? Roger will recognize this. It's a solid side irrigation system. We had a lot of them in our University of Nebraska system. This one was abandoned years ago because we switched to no-till and we didn't need the irrigation anymore. But it's a buried pipe with a water line going up to the sprinkler. One of those water lines broke loose from the sprinkler, was laying out sort of like this. The planter driver thought it was going to bounce like this when he hit it. Nope, we can cut water line. You think I'm worried about cutting residue? So again, take care of the planter. We have the notch crumblers. This is a producer only put one on, again, to create some loose soil. Shown there is also a shaft rebounder to get the seeds to the bottom of the seed V. The early version of the shaft rebounder looked more like this, but get the seed to the bottom of the seed V. I can like that for uniform seeding depth, for uniform growth and emergence. You avoid problems like this. This is dryland corn on corn that's been grazed, planted off to the side of the old row, only about 4 inches to the back. You can see that one little plant way up in the top edge. He was laying up on the side of the seed V in dry soil until it rained a few days later, and that's why he's behind compared to his neighbors who are at the bottom of the seed V. That's why I'm to the point I won't plant without a Keaton or a rebounder on my planter to get the seeds to the bottom of the seed V. Or, like I say, there's new ones on the market now. Get the seed to the bottom. I said I plant deeper. These are two adjacent plants in a field with planter bounce problems. That's why we put the suitcase weight on the row unit. That's why we put the sandbag in the row unit. When we're planting down the old corn row, we don't bounce. We flatten it. With our biological activity, it flattens easy for us. First couple years of no-till, you're going to plant beside the row. Once your soil biology is built, then you can go on the row. For corn on corn, we'll go beside the row. The plant on the left side, seed was down about 2.5 inches deep, good root system, good ear potential. The one on the right side was there was some bounce. That seed, when we found where it was attached, compared to the soil surface, was only about 1.25 inches. Plant deeper for better root system, for better resiliency. Plant deeper. I've been telling producers that for years in Nebraska. Here's a producer who says, I'm going to go out and do replicated plots to prove you wrong. You know, we're going to plant 2.25 deep. This is 6 replications. So these are strips replicated across the field. He went to 3 inches deep. Look how much corn he picked up. He does some demonstration plots for Pioneer. As Pioneer was walking the plots, he goes, you've got the most uniform stand of any one of our plots. Why? He says, I plant deeper. And everyone goes, what do you mean plant deeper? As you go deeper, the soil temperature is more uniform, more buffered. As you plant deeper, soil moisture is more uniform, more buffered. Anytime you get more uniform growth. Anytime you get more uniform growth, you get better yield. And again, continuous no-till with soil structure, I'm not worried about going deeper. Now, he's in a reduced till system himself. I tell people like yourselves, whatever you normally plant, set the planter half-inch deeper for 2 rounds. Put flags there. Follow it through to harvest. And I'll be willing to bet next year you're going to plant the entire farm a half-inch deeper, and you're going to set 2 flags for another half-inch. And when you do that, I've got guys who've gone from 1.5 inches to 3. But it took them 3 years to do it, a half-inch at a step. I'm at 3.5. Because of long-term no-till, good soil structure, we've got water to penetrate, quick rain. There's no such thing as cold, wet soil because it drains away. It doesn't matter if you're at 1 inch or 3 inches. Plant comes up at the same time for us. Now, earlier I showed you this. I said 1 inch, 3 inch, 2 inch. This is replicated strips across the field because as a 6-year-old planter, I made several strips. I'm going to call this bare soil. It's not. The reason I'm calling this bare is the day we planted the corn, I took a large bale of corn residue and I unrolled it to add 200 bushel per acre extra residue on top of that soybean residue. And it looks a little stunted there, doesn't it? Well, one thing, you're not comparing it against the same color background. Yes, it was a little cooler and wetter at planting time, but in the heat of the summer, it was warmer and wetter. Came harvest time. This was a short season 92-day corn because I wanted mature corn for an August field day. So the yields are down a little bit. The bare, the soybean residue, 1, 2, and 3 inches deeper, increased yield. Residue, 1, 2, and 3 inches, increased yield. All right, 92-day corn, not normal for August harvest. So the next year we did corn on corn. And again, this is what it looked like mid-season. Had a 102-day variety and 112-day variety, 1, 2, and 3 inch planting depths. Longer season corn yields more. You're using more carbon dioxide, sunlight energy to make yield. Look at the planting depths. I circled that 264 over there. It was about that time we decided to go to 3.5 on our research farm and never regretted it. And that's why this last year we ran 227 corn. Our county average, if you don't have an APH for crop insurance purposes, dryland corn, Lancaster County, Nebraska is 119. Irrigator, if you don't have an APH, you take 171. Our APH is 186. We're planting deeper. We're using no-till to our advantage. We're using soil structure to our advantage. I'm not afraid of planting deeper under residue. Again, this is corn on corn. Biological activity, corn on corn. That's what it looked like at harvest time. That's the same field I just showed you with all that residue mid-season. Biological activity eats up our residue. That's okay. The carbon coming off that residue is feeding carbon dioxide into the crop canopy. Some of the carbon nutrients are going in the soil. I love soil biology when it comes to long-term continuous no-till. I'm supposed to be done in 3 minutes. Drills, air seeders. This is a corn college. I'm not planting corn. Well, once in a while I do. I already told you, cut or handle residue. Penetrate soil, seed to soil contact, close the seed V. Same thing, drills and air seeders. I already showed you this. Plug up the drill or air seeder if you don't spread the residue. Divide by 4 when it comes to residue clearance, 7.5 inch spacing versus 30 inch spacing. Multiply by 4 when it comes to this. Again, 7.5 versus 30, there's 4 times as many openers in the ground. Here's a dealer in the mid-80s, the demonstration we're doing, trying to promote no-till beans. As he started drilling, every soybean seed was on top of the ground. He said, no problem, you tighten the down pressure springs in back, I can get 300 pounds per row available down pressure. 300 times 24 openers on a 15-foot drill is 7,200 pounds. 7,200 pounds pushing this way, and I said, how much your drill weighs? He says, 5,000. That dry wheel is about 6 inches off the ground, and that's how many volunteers from the audience it took to make it to work. I don't recommend that one. Dealers like this are no longer in the system. Dealers who are selling no-till now understand no-till. If not, talk to the neighbor who's no-tilling, but pay attention to what's going on out there.